Hello and welcome to the Little Knowledge Podcast, where we've managed to just squeeze an episode into March. Last day of March, we're recording this, but we squeezed it in. My name is Paul Busby, and with me, as always, is Goff Morgan. And if you haven't seen one of our podcasts before, basically we sit down and chat. We don't want to lecture you, really. We chat about the wonderful tales and the wonderful people that are involved with some of these incredible properties in Southeast Wales. And we've done about 38, 39 of these videos. So I know.
I was startled. What about the rest of you?
Yes. Absolutely. Do you know, I've been asked to give a talk on Kevin Mabley House. And I had to watch our old podcasters research. I couldn't remember part of the details, so I'm glad we did that one. How are you, Goff? Are you okay?
I'm fine and dandy, thank you. Hello, everybody. Greetings to you. I'm doing nicely. Yep, ready. Have a cup of coffee to hand. Ready to go into some very peculiar areas today.
Yes, Goff's bit is back. Goff's bit is usually where he talks about either a murder, or something folkloric or supernatural, and this one certainly has that, doesn't it?
It's wild and woolly, folks. Wild and woolly.
Okay. I might even chip in with a little bit of my own on that kind of topic, because I discovered something after we settled on what you were doing. So anyway, it might be a bonus bit of folklore.
Cool.
Let's see. So we are actually going to be talking about Penllyn Castle, which has been around a very long time in various forms. It's almost, I'm only doing this out of habit, because our map today doesn't really mean that much. Just to show you where it is, Cowbridge is here.
Oh, yes, yes.
So over in this is on your way to Merthyr and this direction. So, and if we zoom in, we have Penllyn Castle. There we go.
But, right, yes, we will.
But if we do our usual, imposing the modern onto the past, it hasn't really changed at all.
Oh, no, interesting.
Not really.
Well, what looks like was a walled garden, the shape is still there, but the walled garden bit isn't. That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, all that's really happened, I mean, this little
bit in the middle is still there.
The chapel, the church is still there. Of course, Penllyn itself has grown, as you can see the village. But apart from that, not a great deal of difference this time.
No.
It's almost nice not to find it underneath a housing estate.
Well, yeah. Or flattened, which is the other thing that generally happens.
Which was the style of that we've had. So let's have a little look at this. There we are, perched upon the hill.
Oh, gosh.
With the mist rising from the woods below, we have Penllyn Castle. Now, in 1963, a lady in a panic contacted the local fire brigade to say, the castle's on fire. It wasn't. It was merely the mist that sometimes rises from the woods.
Yeah.
One of our old friends, Iolo Morganwg, wrote, when the hoarse waves of Severn are screaming aloud and Penllyn's lofty castle involved in a cloud, if true, the old proverb, a shower of rain is brooding above and will soon drench the plain. Which basically, if you examine it, basically says, if there are dark clouds, it might rain. If it looks a bit dodgy, it might rain.
Yeah.
But Iolo is far more romantic.
He still refers to that. This cloud formation system must be quite common, because he references it sitting on top of a cloud. Yeah. So when he's writing that, this must have been going on in the early 19th century, late 18th century, or whatever,
Absolutely.
So it's a feature of the geography, which is quite interesting.
But our story starts way before that, because Penllyn Castle, the first castle, how it gets its name, was in about 1135.
Oh, right.
And here's a little bit of the original castle you can see there. And where we get 1135 from is this work here is called herringbone masonry.
Yeah.
It's all diagonals. Now, the Saxons did that, but so did the Normans. And we think around about 1135, that's probably when the original Penllyn Castle was actually built by a man called Robert Norris, who was sheriff to the Earl of Gloucester. Now, the Earl of Gloucester did a pretty good job. The Earl of Gloucester married Mabel, Robert Fitzhamond's daughter, and Mabel is of Kevin Mabley.
Oh,
Kevin
right.
Mabley was named after Mabel.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yes, remember that, yeah.
And Mabel brought a lot of Gloucestershire and a lot of South Wales with her as a dowry. But it's quite interesting here. They say 1135. In 1138, the anarchy begins. Now that's Stephen versus Matilda.
Oh.
And Mr. Norris's boss, the Earl of Gloucester, loathed King Stephen.
Mm.
So whether this wasn't actually built to cow the natives by the Normans, it might have actually been built against the king himself.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, possibly.
Another bit of Welsh rebellion going on.
A little bit, by someone who isn't a Welshman, yeah.
Yeah, by someone who isn't Welsh. But again, Wales has been a constant problem.
Always.
There's the herringbone.
There's the herringbone. This is about 1900. So what happens was, the Norrises leave. What always happens is a daughter will marry someone, and as part of the dowry, the castle goes to that man's family, and that's how the ownership changes hands quite a lot in our story, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And in the late 14th century, Lucy Norris married the splendidly named Fighting Turbervilles. And as part of the dowry,
that's a brilliant, isn't it?
He got Penllyn Castle, which is very good. Although Penllyn Castle under the Turbervilles was constantly being burnt. Because as was the style, shortly afterwards of the next century, at least early next century, Owain Glyndŵr came through and burnt Penllyn Castle. That didn't stop. They then built a Tudor house on the site, the Turbervilles, attached to the remains of the old Norman castle.
Oh, yeah.
So they attached it on. And then when John Turberville died in 1533, there was a disagreement over who should inherit, whether it should be his daughter Gwenllian or her first cousin Christopher, the female-male tussle. And Gwenllian wasn't going to hang about, quite frankly. She got her two sons-in-law, Robert Stradlin and Robert Stradlin.
That was easy when it came to writing the Christmas card, wasn't it?
Well, one was legitimate and one was illegitimate.
Oh, right. Oh, right.
But they're both called Robert, and they put together 100 armed men to seize Tivixton, which they did, and then they headed off to Penllyn Castle and set the place ablaze, with Christopher Turberville still inside.
Oh, my goodness me.
He managed to escape, but not without getting a great pellet of lead shot in his hose while fleeing.
Oh. Ooh. Nothing worse than lead slot in your hose, is there?
Oh, terrible.
Terrible evening that was.
Unfortunately, though, a servant was murdered during this tussle. And so it reached the very top.
Let me just get back to the Stradlings. We've come across the Stradlings elsewhere, haven't we?
That's nearby St. Donat's Castle.
St. Donat's. I thought it was St. Donat's. Yes, I thought I'd double check with you before I opened my mouth. Yeah.
So it got into
a little bit of inter-area scrapping going on then. One bunch against the other bunch in Glamorgan. Yeah, that's
pretty much. The Turbervilles also owned the magnificently named Scare House, which is nearby. And the next time we do a Halloween episode, we are doing Scare House. It's wonderful. It's aptly named.
Is it really? Oh,
it certainly is. But anyway, they got a corpse on their hand here.
Oh, yeah.
So it goes right up to the king, and this man has to sort it out.
Oh, well done. Yeah.
I know. Or to be more accurate, this man. Thomas Cromwell, of course. And the way Cromwell solves it is it's pretty cold. He says, as Stradlin is a proper man and a good archer, and willing to pay a reasonable fine, I recommend him for the king's pardon. Oh. And for a £40 fine, that was settled, and the whole case was settled, really, with Tivixton going to Gwenllian and Penllyn, going to Christopher. So that's how they settled it all.
All right.
But it didn't stop the Turbervilles having scraps. You said local scraps. 1616, they had a run-in battle in Cowbridge, which lasted for 3 days. The Turbervilles versus the Bassets of Beeper Castle. 3 days, and it reached Star Chamber.
Okay.
So they liked a good scrap, really.
Yeah.
And then we don't know, really, because they had a problem, because they were Catholic, the Turbervilles.
Yes.
And when you get to the age of Charles II, there are still problems with Catholic priests. Some Catholic priests, of course, as you know, will be hidden in the house, and some pretended to be servants and worked in the house. And this man, Mr. John Lloyd, or Father John Lloyd, was arrested at Penllyn Castle. Arrested at Mr. Turberville's house in Penllyn, because we don't actually know the state of the castle or the Turberville's house at that time.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because, it's always on fire, and it's...
Yeah.
So John Lloyd's arrested. and he gets thrown into prison, into Cardiff Castle jail. And then another man, Father Philip Evans, is thrown in as well. Now, Father Philip Evans was actually another thing we've talked about. Was one of John Arnold. Do you remember John Arnold, the priest hunter of Llanfihangel Court?
Oh, yes.
John Arnold got him, and he had a £200 reward. And the man who actually got the information. Now, we talked about little people on our podcast before. Henry Dyke, if you remember, and the clever Harcourt Little Dyke was one of the good guys. Yeah. Well, Main Trott, informer on this priest, was not one of the good guys. He was a former dwarf in the court of the kings of Spain and England.
Oh!
He married into the Catholic family of the future St. David Lewis.
Yeah.
Went right the way through her fortune. Yeah. Was kicked out of the court of King Charles for his disreputable behaviour. And was down on his luck and decided, well, you know, I used to be a Catholic. I know where all the priests are.
Yeah.
And he decided to take the £200 that John Arnold did, and he decided to dob them in.
Oh, gosh, blimey.
Main Trott, the bad guy.
Well. Yeah, a former royal jester figure. Dear me. Good Lord. Well.
So he dobs them in, and of course it doesn't end well. Arrested, hanged, drawn, and quartered, I'm afraid, both of them. Both Evans and Lloyd in 1679. The Turbervilles, they ended up in prison, jail as well. 2 of them died in captivity. They probably weren't treated very well either. Yeah. And you can see what happened to them.
Yeah.
The execution took place. It's now a junction, I think, really. Yeah, the junction of City Road, Richmond Road, in Roath. So that's what happened to them.
Good Lord.
What happened to Main Trott, however, he carried on in 1679 after this. They decided to have a Burn the Pope Day in Abergavenny. And Main Trott and John Arnold was there. Main Trott.
That's fallen out of favour for some reason. I mean,
it has a bit.
Yeah, I mean, they probably do the food festival instead now, you know.
Yeah, the food festival has replaced Burn the Pope Day. Main Trott was reported as being there, happily running about the place with a gun, with a musket, no, a blunderbuss. He's armed with a blunderbuss, firing happily into the Abergavenny night sky. Main Trott, not one of our heroes, really, of this podcast.
No. one of history's more peculiar figures, though, isn't it?
Yes. But Lloyd and Evans, there's a little sort of addendum to their story, because in the 1880s in Holywell, in an attic, they found this wooden box, and in it were the remains, 2 skulls covered in velvet. And only 2 years ago was it finally identified happily that they'd actually found the remains of Lloyd and Evans.
Oh, gosh. Well. How
interesting. Just 2 years ago. And by looking at the skull, they could tell the head had been put on a spike. And it was horrible the way they did it. But and they became saints in 1970 when Pope Paul VI made 40 saints of England and Wales.
Yeah.
And there are now, you know, schools named after both Lloyd and Evans. No school named after Main Trott or John Arnold.
Main Trott Comprehensive.
Main Trott, that'd be a rough school, wouldn't it? Yeah. That would be a rough school.
Yeah. Everybody dobbed everybody else in at lunchtime. It was terrible.
Well, we don't know really. I mean, the Turbervilles eventually did leave. We don't know what state they left it in, really, Penllyn Castle. And then it sort of passed, it passed through family. The Sayes family, who originally built Gare House, and Sir Edward Stradlin himself had it, passed on to Bussy Lord Mansell, and it was his daughter we've got here. This is Louisa Barbara Mansell. When she got married, she became Lady Vernon, who didn't like Lord Vernon at all.
Oh,
bad marriage. They lived apart. She accused him of womanizing and essentially naming Mrs. Brown, his own daughter's maid, Lord Vernon. And nobody really understood Lady Vernon. That's what comes across in her will. No one understood her. She wasn't happy. Only one woman understood her, and that was called Emilia Gwinnett. And so what Lady Vernon did was basically hand Penllyn Castle over to the only woman, the only person who listened to her, which was Emilia Gwinnett.
Oh, gosh, it's interesting.
This is Emilia Gwinnett. Well, it's not really. The only portrait of Emilia Gwinnett in existence is a silhouette. I haven't got the original, but this is a silhouette of a lady of that period.
Oh, right, I see. Okay, yeah. Oh, right. So there's just a silhouette of her. Well.
Well, in fact, her brother was quite famous. Her brother, Button Gwinnett, was actually one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And was governor of the state of Georgia.
Good Lord.
Before dying tragically in a duel. I mean, campaigns were quite rough in those days.
Yeah.
And Button Gwinnett was killed in a duel, but his sister Emilia was also pretty tough because she had Penllyn Castle, but her brother Samuel, by the way, her dad, the Reverend Samuel Gwinnett, has the most bitter gravestone known to man.
Really?
On his tombstone in Gloucestershire, he basically spends the entire time not saying "Here lies Samuel Gwinnett," but just really having a go at a local priest. So bitter.
Oh, what a way to go!
I guess because he was the Reverend.
His tombstone because it's got a carved figure with two fingers sticking up on top of it. Yeah, most tombstones have that, not his.
Well, I've got to say, Lady Vernon's will is also quite interesting, though, about Emilia. She says, to have the castle, reside there mostly in the summer. All my dogs may be carried to Miss Gwinnett wherever she is. Very good with dogs, Emilia was. And I request the box I always keep under my bed only to be opened and examined by Miss Gwinnett alone. The contents she knows what to do with.
Oh.
No idea what that was.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it?
So Amelia and Lady
something about dobbing the husband in, isn't it? It's got to be some papers and documentations wanting to get their own back at him post-mortem. It's got to be something like that.
Well, Amelia's the person.
We don't know what happened to that box then.
No.
Oh, God.
I reckon knows what to do with is basically meant burn it.
Oh,
because the papers of whatever was in the box, only Emilia was allowed to see, and she knows what to do with it.
That sounds more purposeful than burn it, though.
Oh, I see. You think she had yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, she got a plan for what was happening with that was in that box. Isn't that interesting?
Well, I wouldn't mess with Emilia Gwinnett because she also had, her brother had a place called Cottrell Park, which was, I think in the end, pulled down in the 1970s. And she wanted that estate as well. And it was suggested that she was quite ruthless to get it and that she burnt her brother's will and estate records and chronicles in order to inherit that, which she did. But the story was her ghost was then trapped at Cottrell Park. Because of how she managed to get it.
Yeah.
So what Emilia did when she took over here, she would have to start building, because it's really hard to work out what it looked like in the 1780s, because this is it in the 1780s.
Oh, gosh, yes.
So we've got our herringbone bit of the original castle, but we've got what looks like the old Turberville place without a roof, would you say?
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was going to say it's that Tudor building that went up, isn't it? It was derelict now, clearly.
So unless Lady Vernon had built a more modern house, we cannot see because it's not romantic for this sketch.
Yeah.
But there's some bizarre, again, 1780s. I can't work out what on earth's going on here. Same period.
Yeah.
And we've got it from the other side. I mean, is that a roof there? I mean, maybe that's where they're living?
It seems to be, if you look at the context of the picture, you've got lots of people sitting around as if almost if they're going for a walk in the country at a romantic ruin. Yeah. There's two people clambering up the hill in the previous picture, a chap just sitting there taking in the view. It's clearly not an occupied space. So it's getting that sort of romantic ruin walk around day out thing. It's a hell of a state, isn't it?
A chap called Donovan appeared in the 1780s and 1790s when Emilia had inherited, and he writes this: the splendid modern residence of Miss Gwinnett. The recent building is apparently erected on the site of the principal part of the ancient castle, and, as if it were really ashamed of such a ruinous appendage, it rises pompously at the front to conceal it from every point of view a stranger can approach.
Oh, really? How odd. So you think, why don't you just knock it down if you're that embarrassed by it?
Well, this is another thing. They said that Emilia was quite eccentric, and she had dogs everywhere, but she also enjoyed blowing up masonry. Sometimes people weren't sure why she was blowing up the masonry. Now, I think she was clearing a path for her new modern house.
Yes,
Not just blowing up masonry for fun.
No, randomly for a laugh of an afternoon. Yeah, no, you're quite right. Yes, that sounds a reasonable proposition, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it does make sense, doesn't it?
So there's no indication of what her modern house was. Oh, that's fascinating.
No, 1790s, nothing has, we had no drawings of Emilia Gwinnett's modern house attached to this. But we do know that she left her papers in a bit of a mess. She wanted, when she died, to pass the Penllyn Castle back to the Vernon family, basically, thinking it was a gift from... and she also said she wanted to be buried as close as possible to Lady Vernon. So that French, I mean, she was given a castle. I mean, so you never know. It makes you think what was in that box.
I'm intrigued by that relationship. I think nowadays we might cast an interesting rainbow-coloured eye over that relationship, don't you think?
There's a possibility, but it makes me think that maybe there was correspondence in the box. But again,
that's interesting. That's interesting as well. Yeah. Well, yeah, quite, yeah. Oh, how interesting.
But we don't know. Unfortunately, when she dies in 1807, Emilia, her papers are a complete mess. She wanted all the stuff at Penllyn Castle to stay as heirlooms. She had organ, musical instruments, bookcases, tables, beds. It was all there. But because it was such a mess, it was a lot of legal battles. And legal battles, that means Chancery.
Oh, here we go.
And unfortunately, Chancery ordered the sale of all the contents of Penllyn Castle, including her wonderful library, which had a demonstration of John Frick's lack of wit and learning in his understanding of the Holy Scripture, 1557. She had Chaucer on vellum as well. That had to be sold. So all the stuff she wanted to remain there was sold after she died. And it was an almighty legal tangle. In the end, the estate ended up with the Earl of Clarendon and it passed to someone else. And so by 1845, there's a rumour going around. And the rumour is, and this is a letter that survived, a Mrs. Nichol, I think from Cowbridge, gossiping, has said, have you heard that Mr. John Homfray of Llandaff has purchased Penllyn Castle and part of the estate for £30,000. Mr. Homfray comes to reside next year. I don't much admire the importation, for he is a very high and mighty gentleman. Which was maybe a little harsh. She hasn't met him yet. But before we get on to the Homfrays, Goff.
Gossip.
What are they walking into? There is a legend, there could be something waiting for them around Penllyn.
Very, very odd. That's the best way to describe this. Now, if I can... let me just read you this little account of what is going on. This is a quote from Mary Trevelyan's Folklore and Folk Stories of Wales, 1909. Again, it's interesting. This date we talked about before, this date, the early 19th century, early turn of the 20th century, people are collecting folk tales. And this comes from a chapter within Trevelyan's book called Dragons, Serpents and Snakes. And it says, the woods around Penllyn Castle, Glamorgan, had the reputation of being frequented by winged serpents. And these were the terror of old and young alike. An aged inhabitant of Penllyn, who died a few years ago, said that in his boyhood the winged serpents were described as very beautiful. They were coiled when in repose, and looked as though they were covered with jewels and all sorts. Some of them had crests sparkling with all the colours of the rainbow. When disturbed, they glided swiftly, sparkling all over, to their hiding places. When angry, they flew over people's heads with outspread wings bright, and sometimes with eyes too, like the feathers in a peacock's tail. He said it was no old story invented to frighten children, but a real fact. His father and uncles had killed some of them, for they were as bad as foxes for the poultry. This old man attributed the extinction of winged serpents to the fact that they were terrors in the farmyard and the coverts. What on earth is going on here? I mean, this is very, very intriguing, because these winged serpents do crop up all over the place. They crop up again in another part of Glamorgan in Penmark Place. And Trevelyan refers to them about an old woman whose parents in her early childhood took her to visit Penmark Place, Glamorgan, said she often heard the people talking about the ravages of the winged serpents in the neighbourhood. She described them in the same way as the man of Penllyn. There was a king and queen of serpents, she said, in the woods around Penmark, and more of them in the woods around Bupa, this Beaupre. The old people in her early days said that wherever winged serpents were to be seen, there was sure to be buried money or something of value near at hand. Her grandfather told of an encounter with the winged serpents in the woods of Porthkerry Park, not far from Penmark. He and his brother made up their minds to catch one and watched a whole day for the serpent to rise. Then they shot at it, and the creature fell wounded, only to rise and attack my uncle, beating him about the head with its wings. She said a fierce fight ensued between the men and the serpent, which was at last killed. She had seen the skin and feathers of the winged serpent, but after her grandfather's death they were thrown away. Buried money had been found not far from Penmark Place in her childhood, and she said that she'd had been hidden away by somebody before going to the great battle of St. Fagans. Well, I mean, this is very interesting if you get into sort of cryptozoological business, because there's a lot of detail about this. And the bit of the skin that was preserved and thrown away. I mean, this is a very common feature of cryptozoology. Cryptozoology is basically the study of legendary stroke mythical creatures to examine the records to see if there is a commonality to prove that they might have existed or been another type of creature. But these creatures were much more common than you expect. Now, if you look at the framework in which she's writing, it's 1909. She's talking about an old person whose grandfather. So you're going back about 4 generations. You are looking at around about the first quarter of the 19th century when they're talking about these incidents, which is where they're heading into now. So in the woods around Penllyn, it's supposed to be full of these winged serpents. They also they crop up in North Wales around about 1812. There's an account of them there. I'll come back to this North Wales in a moment. It gets all very peculiar. But also these things actually do crop up over Europe. All over Europe. It's not just a feature here. So if you read it, if you look at some of the cryptozoological sites, this is just one example of Welsh cryptids showing up. And some of the Cryptozoologicon website gives them a name, says that they refer to as Gwiber, 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 which was the Welsh name for viper. And also there's some indication that they may be being conflated with wyverns, which are tiny dragons, possibly legless, possibly just very short legs, very short creatures, flying creatures, little snappy little things, snappy little dragons. So you're getting into dragon lore as well here.
The Jack Russell of dragons.
The Jack Russell of dragons, the irritated one who was always at your ankles. Yes, you're far more annoying than the big ones. But again, because of that echo, reason I bring up the wyverns bit and the dragons bit is, again, you're getting this idea of a horde being present with these things as well. So you wonder whether 2 stories have actually been conflated there. So what you're talking about is somebody attacking a species of something in the woods, which has been in the area, which has been wiped out. What could it be? Now, there are lots and lots of suggestions for this. Let me do a little bit of a screen share with you and show you some things here. A gentleman called Shuka has written a book, a magnificent book studying all of this, called From Flying Serpents to Winged Toads. And this is an illustration which occurs on his book about, actually, again, you can see that rainbow type quality of the flying serpents as they're described in the area here. Now, there's lots of suggestions about what these things could actually be. Are they literally winged serpents? Well, winged serpents cropped up in all sorts of bestiaries, but there is a suggestion that they were actually pheasants, a type of pheasant.
Yeah, that was my initial. But country people would know what a pheasant was.
Well,
they know the difference.
Interesting. You would expect they would. I mean, pheasants were regularly hunted and eaten, so you think they would know what a pheasant was if they saw it. A lot of it, again, they're things they're described as sleeping coiled Some long neck birds tuck their neck under the wing. Some long tail birds curl the tail around as well. So you're in a situation where if you've got a bird with a long tail and a long neck, and they're wrapped up, you can see it. So a long, slender bird. Now, if we think, is it a pheasant? Well, no, that doesn't look anything remotely like what you would think a pheasant would actually be, does it? That's just not working as an idea. However, based upon some of the descriptions, the Cryptozoologicon website came up with this little interpretation. Now, that's a lot more different. You can see the serpent-like quality. I mean, they're going in what is the duck solution. The duck solution. Have you come across the duck solution?
No.
If it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck,
it's probably what you mean.
Yeah. So they've applied the duck solution. They say, look, if it's got wings and it's got feathers, it's probably a bird. So they tried to take the examples of where a bird could come about. This is a little fanciful, to tell you the truth. However, what they do mention within that website, that across Europe at one point, there was China, there was a species of pheasant called Reeves pheasant, and this is quite astonishing if you look at it. That is Reeves pheasant, the big long bird in the front.
Ooh.
Now, when you look at that tail,
that's interesting.
You think, well, there you can see why they might think that was a serpent. Likewise, this will go up to 6 foot long. Wow. It's not a small thing. It's 6 foot in length. So if you posit the idea that you've got a species of pheasant which possibly has an elongated neck as well, suddenly you've got something which stretches out to virtually 8 foot. And if it darts straight, because when they dart, one of the descriptions of the way the creatures move is they go straight, arrow straight, like a spear, when they dart off. They dart into their hiding places.
Do we have any evidence of that species ever being in South Wales?
No.
That's what we need to find.
Also, it's the type of this. It's what they're saying is pheasants can grow into this shape. Yeah. So it may be a lost or extinct type of pheasant. They go on to talking about hangovers from the Ice Age and this, that, and the other, which I can't really comment on. But they say that it is possible that if you look at that tail, it's put a longer neck on the front, a swannish neck on the front, and a more. If you look at the pattern again, the color schemes of some of the pheasants that are illustrated behind, you've got some incredibly elaborate colors going on at the back there.
It convinces me. Do pheasants attack fowl, and are they a terror in the farmyard?
They do. They attack fowl, not for what's the implication within the story of eating. They'll attack any bird because they're incredibly territorial, and the males are very aggressive.
Well, that does go with the story.
So they could be. If you've got these large pheasant type birds which are wading into hen houses and attacking because of their territorialism, you suddenly get into something which does have in the realms of possibility. However, it gets into more intriguing, because when do you think the last sighting of winged serpents was within Wales?
Oh gosh. If I had to guess, it would probably be late 19th century.
2001.
Wow, really? Where was that?
Dragon sighting 2001. This is the cryptozoologicity site. This is mentioned by Carl Schuker, the chap that wrote the book we were talking about, and it took place in Powys in March in 2001.
My goodness.
The British naturalist and some colleagues were conducting some research in the area after being notified by a local of something strange that was seen earlier on in the year. They stood at the edge of some woods by a quarry and suddenly espied an extraordinary entity. Measuring 2.5 feet or so in length, it resembled a serpentine dragon with 4 short limbs. This has got legs, this one, but its head was shaped very like that of a seahorse.
Wow.
We're not talking about the same creature, but we've got this weird thing which literally floats around and disappears back into the caves. Now, obviously, this is obviously naturalists have been watching this. We're not talking about people who are gone out for a night on the pop and then seen something floating around. And they're convinced it was neither an optical illusion nor a model, but was truly alive. But if you go back into what our flying snakes are, the flying dragons, way back in the nice old medieval bestiaries, we have this chap, the Amphitera. The Amphitera. Now that is much more the creature that was seen bobbing around
isn't it?
In the gravel pit.
That looks like a flying serpent to me.
That looks like a flying serpent. So what you've got is basically the creatures that you've seen flying around. The winged serpents of Penllyn are much more like this. They're not that creature, really. Totally a different thing. However, if you could extrapolate that there perhaps was at some point within that part of Wales, in Glamorgan, some parts of Wales, a species of pheasant similar to the Reeves pheasant, which was Chinese, then you go, oh, there could be a lost cryptid, an extinct species which has gone out and people are only remembering. So again, what that skin was that the chap had and kept, which was thrown away, who knows? It could be anything. It always happens with this. It happens with the poor old Yeti. You go up to the Yeti and they find some sort of hairy skull cap, and it's the skin of a Yeti. They take it away, and it's not. It's just like a gorilla or an orangutan. So it's the same. So it probably could have been anything. But there you are. So who knows? This is what they could be walking into in the 19th century when they take over Penllyn Castle in the woods.
Well, I'm convinced.
Snaky sort of pheasant things bobbling around and attacking the birds.
Well, very good. I mean, there are still Homfrays around today. So if there are any Homfray legends about seeing any of these things, do let us know.
Yeah.
Because they appear.
Any old skins hanging around in the attic, point them out. People are looking
check
for
your
it.
attic. Remember, in Holywell, they checked their attic and found 2 saints.
Oh, yes, right, yes.
Always check your attic. Well, that's fascinating. I mean, it keeps the little mystery going, but how interesting. It makes sense to me.
It is interesting because, again, initially you think pheasants, no, they're not going to mix that up. And then you see, look at some of those pictures. You think, oh, gosh, yes.
It's entirely possible, isn't it?
Entirely possible.
Wow. Well, into this come the Homfrays. John Homfray, and he has to, well, whatever Emilia's house looked like, it needed rebuilding. Yeah. So he did that to it.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah, that's a bit more upmarket.
So now we've got this 1850s house here, but still with Emilia's somewhere here as well. He just altered it, and still with the old castle at the back. I'll show you an overhead view towards the end, so you'll see how this all, because still a bit of Turberville house as well.
Yeah. So when we're saying Homfray, I suppose, are we still talking about the Homfrays who later on became industrialists in the latter part of the
Homfray? You're quite right, Goff. Homfray only ever means industry in the 19th century. They came from Worcestershire, essentially. And the famous Francis set up the Cyfarthfa ironworks, and he had 2 sons, Sir Jeremiah and Samuel, and they ran the Penydarren works. Samuel, the younger brother, became an enormous success, and he actually added family ties to his industry when he married. He hit the jackpot because he married the daughter of Sir Charles Gould Morgan of Tredegar House.
Oh, yes, that's
Samuel Homfray had worked there on the Tredegar estate and all that land. So he did he was quite a boisterous man, but Jeremiah was not quite as successful ultimately, although he did get knighted, interestingly.
Oh, right.
Sir Jerry, as he was known in the Homfray family. Yeah. Sir Jerry. He had to do something eventually that another aristocrat did on our podcasts. He was bankrupt, I think in 1813, and he ran off to Boulogne.
Oh, gosh.
To hide from his creditors.
Gosh.
And it's Sir Jerry's son, John, who takes over here. And John had lived in Cardiff at Llandaff House. And that's where his home was. They also owned a home in Cardiff called the Corner House. And that's been demolished as well now. But the Corner House was on the corner of St. Mary Street and Church Street. That's where I say because there is a pub now in Cardiff called the Corner House, but it's not that Corner House.
Oh, right. Oh, God, interesting.
Different site. So John, and this is a better view of his new...
Oh, God. Yeah.
The new Penllyn Castle. Again, it's a bit like Llangibby now, isn't it? It's a modern house, but it's called a castle because it still has links. In this case, literal, joined to the original castle.
And they have dabbed some crenellations on it as well to give it a castle-y look, which is very nice.
Exactly. Yes, they did.
It reminds me of what was Horace Walpole's house?
I know what you mean.
Gothic, Strawberry.
It's Strawberry Gothic. Yeah,
Strawberry Gothic. Yes, it's got that little edge, isn't it? Like when you see pictures of his house, you realise that they're very similar.
Yeah. Well, it is that sort of thing. I mean, the Homfrays really did get involved with the Taff Vale Railway and their mineral possessions in Cardiff, which was growing. I mean, they did get quite a lot of wealth, this family. Yeah. But John Homfray needed to make a few alterations, not just to the house, but to the estate, which he did. And at the foot of his drive was the chapel. And it was really a chapel of ease. So the nearby parish church was too far away, so you'd go here instead. It's now called St. John's. And there it is. It was a Turberville church, built by the Turbervilles. But sadly, when John Homfray came here in 1845, his wife died the next year. So I think in grief, he sort of threw himself into this as a sort of a thing. And what was here was the priest's house, but he demolished that and built a lodge.
Oh, right.
And the odd thing is the lodge is grade 1 listed, while the castle is grade 2 listed.
How fascinating.
And if you can see above the door of the lodge, you've actually got the Homfray crest.
Oh, right, yes. Oh, yes.
A wounded otter.
A wounded otter?
It's an otter with an arrow in it.
Oh, yes, I can see that. Yeah, sticking out there.
And the Homfray family motto is wounded but defiant.
Ah, there you are. Where on earth they picked that for? I don't know. To them at some point, they got a bit chippy.
Yeah. He had a slight problem with this, though, John Homfray, because he enclosed the church, the chapel, because it was the end of his drive. The problem is, if you built a wall around it, how are the parishioners going to get to the service on a Sunday?
Oh, I see. So the gate there, actually, that's the way into the property then.
Yeah, and in the end, you had to add a kissing gate.
Behind the gate inside the pottery. Yeah, I see.
Yeah. You had to add a kissing gate, and all kinds of wonderful gates and stiles around Penllyn.
Yeah.
And one has a wonderful, and this is a coffin style.
A coffin style?
So when you've got the cemetery, when you've got the funerals, you would come with your coffin, and the party could rest the coffin on the middle bit, and the bearers could go either side and then pick it up again.
Oh,
gosh. Coffin style.
How interesting.
And our friend Marie Trevelyan came up with a wonderful tale. Again, the great thing about this book is, as you know, Goff, she speaks to people.
Yeah.
She doesn't just compile information.
Yeah.
And she spoke to a farmer from the Vale of Glamorgan, and this was about his dad. This would have been, what do you reckon, middle of the 19th century, I guess. Now, this is the story. This man had been to Cowbridge market and was returning home just before nightfall when he saw a procession coming down the lane leading from his own house to the highway. His horse appeared to have witnessed the same scene, for the animal halted at the entrance of the lane to allow the crowd to pass. The farmer gazed spellbound as the mourners approached, because immediately after the coffin came his own wife, dressed in the deep mourning of a widow.
Oh, good Lord.
She was supported by her eldest son. The crowd passed and vanished, and the horse, scared by the scene, rushed up the lane and halted at the garden gate. Hearing the clatter of the horse's hooves and fearing the animal was riderless, the farmer's wife and son hastened out and were thankful to find the husband safe and unhurt. That night the farmer was unusually moody and silent. He could not help thinking of the strange scene, his own funeral, he had witnessed. A few weeks later, he was seized with a serious illness from which his family hoped he would soon recover, but he said, "I shall never get up again," he said. And then he related the recent experience. And this is where words changed their meaning slightly.
Oh.
Related his recent experience. One of the sons who told me this story said everybody present was unspeakably thrilled. 3 days later, the farmer died.
Yeah.
Thrill, excitement rather than
excitement, happy. Yeah, thrilled is a little bit.
Isn't that something?
Yeah. It's bizarre, isn't it? Yeah, a premonition. A visual premonition. What do you say? Oh, well,
the fact that these coffin styles everywhere also adds to that sort of feeling, I think. That at any moment you could come across your own coffin, your own funeral. Now, so the Homfrays are carrying on. When John Homfray dies in 1877, his son J.R. Homfray, who I like to think always wore a Stetson.
What? Why?
J.R. Goff.
Oh, God.
I know it's one for the teenagers, but come on. You're 18 years older than me, Goff. Come on.
Yeah. And even I blanked it out.
And J.R. Homfray actually had gone to France and he redesigned the drawing room in Second Empire style, Napoleon III style. So every inch was covered, huge mirrors, that sort of thing. But in 1882, something happened here, which I think is particularly interesting. You can see the tower here, which Wasn't that big originally. Sometime around the 1860s, they made it bigger. It's actually a 19th century, at least the top bit is 19th century, and originally it was a water tower.
Oh, right. Oh, interesting.
But this circle here had a clock. Clock isn't there now, as you can see, because I think the clock disappeared on November the 9th, 1882 at 12:30 a.m. You saw how high the castle is.
Yeah.
They didn't have a lightning conductor.
Oh, right.
And in one account, the storm, luckily the Homfrays weren't there at the time and no one was hurt, but the lightning hit. This is like Back to the Future. The lightning hit the clock tower.
Hit the clock tower, yeah.
Destroying, demolishing it.
Gosh.
But it must have, not badly, but badly damaging it, I think it must have done. Destroyed the clock entirely. And according to this one report, the large tower was partially destroyed, the clock damaged. It entered through the face, then the lightning went through the outbuildings, travelled along bell wires, which it melted and twisted into fantastic shapes, and emerged at the front door. A lightning conductor is now fitted.
God, yes.
Another account says that it left again through the front door, that it also entered the window of bedroom. Luckily, the Homfrays weren't there. Yeah. Entered the drawing room. And caused havoc with the furniture. So this lightning is just travelling all around the castle, causing incredible damage.
Yeah.
and this is, I think, when obviously they never did replace the clock.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't seen a clock from that 1882, thing. Incredible, really.
Amazing, isn't it? Yeah. That's the goal, yeah. I mean, you could have taken the house on fire, just set it on fire.
I did find something.
There's a wonderful quote from Lewis Carroll, the White Queen is talking about a storm. She went, "Oh yes, it only got into the house in great lumps and went rolling around." yeah. The lightning obviously got in there in great lumps and went rolling around the drawing room, didn't it?
That's what they did at Penllyn Castle. Yeah, absolutely. Now I found something at auction, Goff. Whenever I research this, I go through old auction catalogues, I go through newspapers, everything for little stories. I found something rather lovely, and it's the late 19th century coffee cups with Penllyn Castle on them.
Oh gosh, are they cool?
They're not bad, are they?
No, they're really good.
And it must be late 19th century. There's no clock on the tower. It's just a mark where it's been left. Yeah. But it gives you an idea of how the castle is looking at that time.
Yeah. Oh, those are really cool.
They're very good. I wonder how much they went for. I mean, not that much, actually. Now, here is my favourite Homfray. Luckily, the last two Homfrays to live in the house, basically, they were both called Herbert.
Yeah.
But they both went by their military titles. We've got the colonel is the dad, the captain is the son. That makes it easy, right?
Yeah.
This is Colonel Homfray, and I'm particularly impressed by Colonel Homfray because he does an awful lot. He does an awful lot around, and he's got a very good sense of humour. He's a good public benefactor. They always seem to have them in the late 19th century, don't they?
Yeah.
Think of Godfrey Morgan at Tredegar House. I think Colonel Homfray was on that sort of scale.
Yeah.
There he is during World War One. When he, I think his moustache, and actually yours at the moment, Goff, does go well with the horns, doesn't it?
It does, actually. It suits nicely.
Very sympathetic, I think.
The regimental goat.
The regimental goat, and it's the 18th regiment, the Welsh regiment, and it's the Bantams. He started a Bantam regiment.
Oh! Oh,
Bantams...
so was he a shorter guy himself, or what?
Do you know what? I do not know.
The Bantams are all little chaps, weren't they? One of the guys we came across in the Bantams was about 4'8" or something, wasn't he? He was dudley.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
One of the war poets. I can't remember his name now.
Luxembourg, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Joshua Luxembourg?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so. Or Rosenberg.
Joshua Rosenberg. Yeah, tiny little chap.
Luxembourg. No, although that would have been handy for fighting in Flanders, I suppose.
Yeah, tiny city for tiny people. Yeah.
He married Blanche Williams of Roath Court. I think Roath Court is the funeral home now.
Yes,
Cardiff. He started a big sort of follower and encourager of the agricultural movement. He was so popular, he was given the freedom of Cowbridge, and it was the only socialist member of the council who suggested it.
Oh, how interesting!
A socialist member who suggested they give him the freedom of the borough. So he got that.
Yeah.
But sadly, of course, the Great War always brings tragedy, and he'd already lost one of his sons. When Frederick George Morgan, the 5th Lord Tredegar, married in 1898, he married a lady called Bassett. Again, it's that Bassett family. And two of the colonel's sons were pages, were the two pages carrying the dress.
Oh, right.
So all these families interlink.
Yeah.
And sadly, one of the pages, John Homfray, was lost in World War One. He died when a shell in Belgium.
Oh, gosh.
So he dies. He had already lost another son at the age of 16 in a motorbike accident in 1913. So they had, I mean, it really was a tragedy, obviously.
Yeah.
They had races on the slope underneath Penllyn Castle. It was the Glamorgan Hunt steeplechase and the point-to-point. He was master of the Glamorgan Hunt, and as we know, Goff, master of the hunt, is a good networking device.
Oh, yeah, massive,
immense status, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, it's how the county oligarchy get together. And it's one of the legs up into society is if you could ride, and therefore you could ride with the hunt, and that got you in with all the best people. We think of these sort of events as being just merely social, but they're not. They're networking events for the oligarchy that ran the various counties at the time. We forget about the county set, as it used to be referred to, and very much in the latter Victorian period and the Edwardian period, has diminished enormously now. But the power of the county set, in terms of stitching up the institutions of the area and in control of the political institutions, the legal institutions, sitting on various boards of parish charities and goodness knows what else. It was very, very influential.
Yeah.
These race meets were all the county sets, basically.
Yeah, the Homfrays were very much in that circle in Glamorgan as master of the hunt itself, of course.
Oh, quite, yeah.
Also, agricultural shows were here as well, including the Vale of Glamorgan Agricultural Show, which was there for 44 years. It left in 1998 and it moved to Penllyn Castle, or at least that was the plan. So they were still having shows there up until 1998.
Gosh, yes. Oh, well.
Now, the colonel did have a daughter who did get married. Her name was Penllyn, another classic name that we heard earlier on. And what they did, she married a man called Johnny Clay. Now, Johnny Clay was known as Mr. Glamorgan Cricket. He played once for England in the Test, and according to, and here's one for the teenagers, according to John Arlott, the great cricket broadcaster, Johnny Clay was the best spinner in England and my favourite cricket writer.
Oh, right, how interesting.
Clay was from Piercefield. His family, at least, were Piercefield Park. The Clays were, of course, it then became a race course.
Yes, yeah.
And he was involved in horse racing as well. But Johnny Clay was a very well-known cricketer. So he marries Penllyn, and what they do is they get quartz from a nearby mine, and this drive is quartz.
You know, I wondered why it was so white.
It's amazing.
I wonder, it is. It's vivid, isn't it?
Imagine it glittering as the sun hits it, as the bride, as Penllyn Homfray marries Johnny Clay and goes down there. Brilliant. Literally brilliant.
Yeah.
The colonel. Towards the end of his day, he died in 1940. And I love the one thing that he was, timekeeping was very big for the colonel.
Yeah.
Timekeeping was vital. On one time, he threw open, it was a sort of an event for an election candidate. And so the election candidate turns up to this hall, and he enters the hall and finds it, and it's about 15 minutes early, and he finds it not many people there. So he thinks, I'll go and refresh myself. So he goes to have a drink.
Yeah.
As soon as it ticks on to 2 o'clock or whenever it was, the colonel calls for the candidate. He's not back from his drink. So the colonel immediately dismisses everyone and ends the meeting. 10 minutes later, because when the colonel says jump, you jump. So they all leave. 10 minutes later, the candidate turns up to find the cleaner putting the shutters on the doors. So be on time when Colonel Homfray mentions it. He also did a first when they decided to make him mayor of Cowbridge, the first mayor of Cowbridge not to be a member of the borough or the corporation.
Oh.
He was so popular, they asked him to do it again.
Interesting.
And this is that drawing room inside the castle, that Napoleon III style.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it's quite nice. In later years, after the colonel's death, you've still got his wife, who was a Williams. Still got his wife here, Blanche. And there she is. And I like this because it's not a posed photo, is it?
No.
You can see on the wall
the
pictures of her lost sons as well there.
Yeah.
All very sad, but it sort of brings it home.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we forget how many families lost loved ones in the First World War. There was hardly a family untouched by loss of somebody.
No.
Yeah, shocker.
Captain Homfray, the colonel's son, takes over, and he had this most amazing. In World War II, Captain Homfray had a mounted unit of Home Guard, the only ones in the country.
Oh gosh, really?
Yeah.
Oh well.
So his Home Guard unit would be on horseback and would, patrol up and down Cowbridge and the Vale of Glamorgan. Home Guard on horseback.
Yep, I've never heard of that before. Amazing.
No, very few people have. And this was actually a very rare photo. It was taken by his former batman from the First War, Mr. Vaughan. And it does show them all there that this is Dad's army on horseback.
Yeah.
Now we get to it. We're almost done. I know we're approaching the hour, but I really like this story. This is when we've entered the 1950s now. And this is expert duel gang, believed active in South Wales. And they've even got where the gang managed to sneak up.
Up the side in the
window.
Yeah.
And I do like this because Glamorgan CID got involved. And they decided that, and what actually happened was Captain and Mrs. Homfray were watching television. That must be the first anecdote we've ever done on this channel where they're watching television.
Yes, quite, yeah.
The dogs didn't hear anything, nor did the 30 hounds that were nearby.
The hunt,
So they managed to get up there and get in and get away with rings and all sorts. As I said, £1,300 worth from two Monmouthshire properties. But they decided that this must have been a higher class of criminal. It can't be a normal South Wales, Glamorgan, Monmouthshire criminals. No, and they decided it was a home counties criminal gang called the Ladder Gang.
The Ladder Gang.
Glamorgan CID. Except, of course, there's one slight problem with this. A ladder was not used.
Oh, no, yeah.
You know, Glamorgan CIDs in this looks like the work of the Ladder Gang. Was the Ladder Gang's modus operandi that they didn't use a ladder?
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Yeah, quite. But isn't it interesting? It's a sort of a class of criminals going on there. Yeah.
Oh, no, a class of criminals.
Not the terrible local criminal. No, these are far too educated people.
Here's the captain. And he actually, his second wife, he did marry Serena Boothby from Penllyn Castle. So Penllyn Castle and Penllyn Castle do have this connection. And that's a good painting of him with the castle in the background. Don't know where that painting is now. I'm sure the Homfray family still have it. I think they still own Penllyn Court, which was a big house in the village, which used to belong to a man called Dr. Salmon, who lived to the age of 106.
Oh, right.
And he paid for the wells and various things. They're called salmon wells and springs and things. Interesting man.
Yeah.
There is an interview where the journalist interviews the Dr. Salmon, and he's extremely elderly. And it's clear that the journalist is patronizing this elderly man, almost as if making the mistake of if someone's losing their hearing, then their intelligence goes with it in proportion.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And basically, Salmon said, basically, well, it took you long enough to get here, didn't it? He wasn't having it at all. So maybe the Homfrays are still in Salmon's old Penllyn Court. Yeah. The captain dies in 1960, and we got this wonderful little picture here. Now, this is Penllyn Castle Gardens, you can see here. And the great thing about this is this lady, she is visiting. She's kind of just visiting, and she's sort of dreaming that one day she might actually live in the castle. That's Joanna Gethin Lewis. And when she grew up, she was an expert on gardens. She was called to the bar. She was a very accomplished person. And she ended up marrying Christopher Corey, who bought the castle from the last Homfrays, or the last ones to live there in 1960.
Oh, right. Oh, cool.
So in the end, she did become the lady of the house.
Yeah.
Here's Christopher Corey. Christopher Corey loved music and was also the Commissioner for Wales for the Scouts. There are always concerts and jamborees and things like that. And he was the High Sheriff, and he died in 1981. And 30 years after he was High Sheriff, Joanna was High Sheriff as well.
Oh, right. Oh, gosh, cool.
I always wonder if anything was left over, because one of the Homfrays created this incredible thing. I think it was Captain Homfray, and I do wonder if Captain Homfray, the Corey reminded me of this with artistic views, because Captain Homfray once created a rug 21 feet by 15 feet in green floral design involving 500 pieces of wool on canvas.
What?
500,000 pieces of wool on canvas. And I wonder whether, just reminded me.
Yeah.
The Captain Homfrey, I imagine I was on his home guard. They were called the Welsh Cossacks, by the way, Captain Homfrey's home guard unit.
Oh, right. Yeah,
and then he goes home and works on his rug.
But yeah, right, great.
The Corys were still there right up to, I think 2018.
Oh, gosh.
But these properties are so difficult. I mean,
Yeah.
if you haven't got the enormous wealth of an industrial estate behind you, how do you upkeep property like this?
Oh, yeah.
It's very difficult. So in the end, in 2018, it was sold to Terry and Jude Edgell. And apparently, he had got quiet and taken her for a walk. And they'd gone for a walk. And she thought that he was going to want a divorce.
Oh.
Instead, he said they've accepted our bid for Penllyn Castle.
Oh, gosh.
They wanted to buy, the original plan was to buy a summer house in Spain or a property which didn't need anything done to it.
Yeah.
In the end, they ended up with an enormous castle, which needs a lot done to it.
Right,
it's a massive job. And this is a good drone picture. It shows you here, we have got the castle, the original Norman one. Here we've got bits of the Turberville house, which they turned into a stables at some point.
Oh, yes, yeah.
You've got this tower, which was 19th century, but the bottom bit must be older.
Yeah.
And with the servants' areas as well, we've now got a combination of Emilia, 1790s, and 1850s Homfray.
Oh,
with Homfray doing all those bays.
So that building, it basically encompasses the entire history of the property virtually, doesn't it? That's fascinating, isn't it?
It does. From 1135 all the way up to the Homfray rebuild.
God, amazing.
Isn't it amazing?
Yeah.
But also amazing is the job that they've had to do, the Edgells, on actually restoring this. This is a massive job. It takes a lot of money, but they're pouring. It's great because the others that wanted to buy it, I've read, wanted to basically Kevin Mableyize it and turn it into apartments.
Oh, yeah.
The Edgells were the only ones that actually wanted to see if they could restore it into a home.
Oh, gosh, it's a challenge.
It certainly is. The sales catalogue made it look... it looks tired. I mean, this is the entrance hall.
Yeah.
You've got the dining room one side, the drawing room the other. The morning room was above the dining room. I mean, it looks nice, doesn't it? But if you look carefully, behind the sales patter, you can actually see that it's a little bit tired, but it's worse than that. There's wood rot, there's dry rot.
Oh,
everything.
Gosh.
And you can they can't cover it up in the magnificent drawing room.
No. Oh, no, yes. Gosh, yes. Oh, blimey, yeah.
And a third of the property is completely derelict.
Right.
And when you actually see the more modern pictures, not done by a estate agent.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Oh, blimey. How did they manage to get that picture and make it look like it did at the estate?
Well, I think they've taken stuff off here to have a look to get behind it.
Gosh, yeah.
But it gets worse.
Oh, gosh.
It gets a lot worse. This is the billiard room.
Oh, good Lord.
And this is the most dramatic.
Oh, blimey. Yes, the guest bathroom.
Hanging on by a thread.
Oh, yeah.
By the way, you can see the restoration as it goes on Jude Edgell's Instagram account called My Welsh Castle. That's where this photograph comes from.
Oh, right.
Also on Facebook, but if you have an Instagram account, it's better to follow her on there. And it's continuing to this day. And she puts incredible videos and things that she finds. Bizarre thing, they found quite recently a whip in perfect condition underneath a floorboard. So it couldn't have slipped under there. It was deliberately placed under the floorboard. So I'm not sure why you would place a whip under a floorboard.
One hastens to ask, might it
No, we won't go into
bedrooms?
No. We'll get back to some carnage, quite frankly. Here's another room.
Tuck that under the floorboard for later.
And at least the curtains are still up.
Oh, the curtains are still up, yeah. Oh, crikey, how on earth do you even start with something like this? It's astonishing, isn't it? You're used to sort of organizations, maybe like sort of the National Trust or something, taking on projects like this, but as an individuals, it must be
this is a couple with their own money when they wanted a place in Spain that didn't need anything doing.
It work, yeah. Gosh.
I guess, I mean, the whole, well, it's divorce or castle thing. I suppose if parallel worlds happen, parallel universes, there must be someone in a parallel universe who went for a walk with their husband thinking he was going to buy a Welsh castle.
Yeah.
And ended up very disappointed.
Oh,
the bell's obviously replaced after the lightning melty unpleasantness. They've got the modern ones. Now, this must be post-1940 because the colonel isn't on here. But Mrs. Homfray and the captain is.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's right. Yes.
There's also a day board as well. But they are finding things because they're trying to put in underfloor heating. They're digging up the floors. And they're finding bizarre things. I mean, look at this. What was going on here underneath the floor?
It looks like the remains of a sort of round tower or staircase or something, doesn't it?
Well, one archaeologist suggests, because remember, this has been the site. Remember, the houses have altered. So this could have been where the outbuildings were to Emilia's house.
Oh, I see.
Or the Turberville house, at least. And someone suggests this could have been an ice house, possibly for the Turberville old Tudor house.
An ice house?
And they've dug more, dug more.
Oh, gosh.
There was a story, a legend of a tunnel that went all the way to a nearby castle.
Oh, there's always a legend of a tunnel that went to a nearby castle.
And they do find kind of sort of chasms, but that's because the thing is built on limestone.
Yeah.
And water will wear that away. But I think that's fascinating. They're still finding bits of the previous iterations of the property.
Oh, yeah, that's astonishing, isn't it?
And of course, the oldest bit, they've had to do a lot of work on this, removing the vines and removing everything else, because this is 1135.
Gosh.
The old keep. But there was a roof here in the 19th century, and as you can see, with mangers, it was used as a stable at some point.
Oh, I wondered what those things were. Oh, they were mangers, were they? Oh, right.
And the views, the view's not bad either.
God, blimey. Whoa. Oh, we live in a fantastic part of the world, really. We don't really recognise it very much, do we, sometimes?
No, we do live in a fantastic part of the world. But that takes us right up to the present day, and it's a private property, obviously. And at the moment, it's like a building site, so it's quite dangerous. So don't turn up at Penllyn Castle, but enjoy the countryside around it. But it is on the way back, which I think is fantastic, really.
Well, it's nice when we got so many properties that are lost. It's nice to see something coming back, isn't it? I mean, that's what makes a change, because we've seen a lot of properties that have just disappeared completely off the face of the earth and are down to the foundations. And it's nice to actually see somebody, paying the time and effort, a big amount of time and a huge amount of effort to get something like it back. It's very nice.
I also quite like the fact, thinking about it, that we were surprised in the 1950s when they had to use explosives to blow up Llanwern House and Colbrook Park in Abergavenny. But clearly, maybe that's what Emilia was doing back in the 1790s. I wish she hadn't got rid of all that old masonry, but of course, it's a house, isn't it? You've got to live in it. Yeah,
well, that's it. There's a living thing. I mean, that's the nice thing about this. More than anything, it demonstrates the lifetime of that property. Which it must be quite extraordinary to have that length of span in one building. I mean, that's incredible, isn't it? It's virtually, you're looking at 8 centuries, aren't you, at least?
Yeah, it's amazing. And it continues, thank goodness. Well, maybe some of those legends and some of those things we're not sure about, such as the serpent and such as what was in Emilia's in the box that was kept under Lady Vernon's bed. And so I do like topics where there are still little mysteries at the end.
Yeah. And remember, check your attic, and if anybody's got any skins of winged serpents, let us know. I'm sure lots of cryptozoologists would be very happy to get their hands on one.
Yes. Or martyrs' bones there's probably still more martyrs' bones. Or even, of course, Captain Homfrays' rug with 500,000 pieces of wool, because I am interested in seeing that. But that's us done, Goff. Thank you all for watching and listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be back soon. If you haven't yet, do share the video. Only now I get it. You're supposed to do this in the first 5 minutes of the video. Do share the video and do subscribe if you'd like to, so you won't miss all the videos coming up, including part 2 of the Morgans of Tredegar House, which is very intriguing. So thank you all for listening.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.